This is Jim Semivan, and you are listening to That UFO Podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. My name is Andy, and I am joined today on the podcast by my guest, obviously. He is an internationally known speaker, award-winning journalist, and best-selling author of over 60 books, including the one we're going to talk about today, which is Extraterrestrial Intelligence and the Catholic Faith. Are we alone in the universe with God and the angels? My guest earned a BA in Religious Studies at Yale University and an MA and PhD in Historical Theology at Emory University. Now retired, he is serving as a professor on the faculties of several universities and colleges and as a member of the National Advisory Council of the US Conference of Catholic Bishops. My goodness, what an intro. Dr. Paul Thigpen. Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Andy, what a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
It's great to have you on, and I was very aware of the dying embers of the cold I've had now for what seems like 12 years as I read through that. So hopefully it came across okay, folks. Very much happy to have Paul on, someone I've been trying to get on for the last couple of months now. And I think the timing, Paul, has worked out really well. As we'll get to, you've recently made an appearance at the Sol Foundation's first hopefully annual conference, along with some huge names in the UFO conversation and some soon-to-be huge names in the UFO conversation as well. But I want to take things back, Paul, right to the start. And in your bio, and guests like to send over bios for themselves and say, here's some stuff that I've done as part of my career. I loved how yours finished with saying that you've had an interest in the UFO topic since you were a child, because it's always how I love to start interviews. So can we start there and go back to your very earliest memories of the UFO topic?
Sure. I was in elementary school in the early 60s, and not even sure how the interest began, but when especially talk about Project Blue Book came out, other kinds of things, I read, whatever capacity I could. I had a couple of dreams that may have been influenced by sci-fi movies, although I don't know how many of those were around. In fact, it was kind of a recurring dream that it was almost like the initial scenario of an abduction, but it would stop right after I'd be lying in bed, which, my regular bed, and my brother was in a double bed with me. And I'm lying there, there's a big window by the bed, and all of a sudden this kind of blue-green light would come down from the sky through the window and hit me and freeze me. I couldn't move. My brother remained asleep. And then the dream would always end there. So my guess is, by that time, excuse me, it's probably early 60s sometime. Maybe I'd seen some movies with that kind of thing, and that's why. But it certainly helped to encourage my interest. The other thing is that when I was a teenager, I would have been, senior of high school, so I would have been 17, with a couple of buddies. I grew up in Savannah, Georgia. That's where I was born. And they have islands on the coast there. Tybee Island is the nearest to Savannah, has the beaches. One evening in the summer, walking along with them on the beach, and all of a sudden we looked up and there were two huge, what were to us unidentified anomalous figures. They didn't look so much like craft. They looked almost like what we might describe as circular plasma. Two of them that were white but with red and green lights inside of them. And to this day, they could have been, there may be some prosaic explanation for that. I don't know. But we got scared, jumped in the car, drove back to my home about 8 miles away. It seemed to follow us in the sky, maybe not, disappeared. But all these things, I'm just saying, whatever they actually were, certainly continued to increase my interest. And I've never lost it. Yeah.
Which is wonderful. And I wonder, was there how intense was your religious or your religion or your faith when you were a child, and did those kind of counteract each other at all?
Well, yeah, I was raised in a Presbyterian family, and interestingly enough, though, at the age of 12, one of my teachers introduced me to Voltaire, the French Enlightenment skeptic, philosopher, and some other folks like that. Reading those books, I lost my faith and was an atheist from the age of 12 to 18. So during that time, my faith wasn't really interacting with it much. As a child, it was just kind of, where does that all fit? After I returned to faith at the age of 18, it's a whole other story to itself. Then, of course, the question was always there, if these things are real, how do they fit into my faith? And that's really the reason I wrote the book. Many years later, I became a Catholic convert, came into the Catholic Church, and discovered there a whole lot more resources, history, tradition about these kinds of things that could help me to try to put it all in place. So that's really, I wrote the book, and I'm coming from a particular tradition. I know there's some, religious scholars who say I can't buy into any particular story or tradition. And I'm not convinced of any particular thing, but I did come from atheism and into this faith, and eventually into the Catholic faith. So I do write and think from within that frame. I know some folks who say or if you look what they do, they'll maybe religious studies scholars, they'll seem like they interpret their faith, Christian, Catholic Christian, in terms of UAP studies, but I tend to do the other. For me, the primary is the Catholic faith, and so I look at UAP studies through the lens of my Catholic faith.
That's interesting. And I was going to ask as well, your family, obviously they were religious. What, if any, views did they have on the UFO topic?
As I recall, they didn't think about it much. And it's not something we talked about much. I wrote a paper in maybe 6th grade or something. I've been reading maybe Kenneth Arnold stuff or something. I don't know. I wrote a paper about it. And I may have mentioned it then, but I just, they were hardworking folks. We had a little family business, and would come home exhausted every night, maybe watch some TV. And I don't think, like a lot of folks, it seemed like an exotic topic, I think, to them. And they probably just didn't have time to think about such things because they were worrying about how are they going to put food on the table, and pay the bills.
Yeah, you're going back, you mentioned the 60s, 70s. There's no social media. People got their news from the newspapers, which was a day old, and the radio and the TV. And things are very much regionalised still, I think, back then, weren't they? That you didn't have this international stage where everyone knows everything that's happening hundreds or thousands of miles away within seconds. Do you think if you mentioned, for example, the dreams you had back then to them, they would have just been dismissed as just silly dreams? Which I'm not saying they weren't dreams, but, would they have entertained the conversation at all, or was it just silly alien talk,
I mean, well, even I myself at that point didn't think anything had really happened. It's just I would wake up. As I recall, I say I may have seen some kind of sci-fi movie or something that had an abduction. I don't know how many would have already been out by that time. We're talking about the early 60s. But as I recall, I didn't even make any kind of connection to alien abduction for a while. It just happened. I kept thinking, the dream kept happening. Why is this dream happening? So consciously, for me at least, I don't think I made any connection to it until maybe after Betty and Barney Hill's story came out, and then other stories started coming out, and I would read those and began to think, wow, that sounds a lot like my dream. But I was never convinced that anything actually happened to me. Just kind of piqued my interest and somehow got into my mind.
Let's get to the point from that childhood till you wrote the book. Did you ever have any sightings or experiences yourself of any kind?
Only the thing when I was in high school that I mentioned.
Right.
And, people, these days we're talking a lot about paranormal things connected. And I certainly did have paranormal experiences, but not really connected to that. I've also written books from the Catholic viewpoint about demons, demonology, that kind of thing. Had some experiences. That's part of what happened to me to bring me back into the faith, things that I couldn't explain otherwise. So I certainly have thought about related topics, but this one I sat on. I started doing research maybe 20 years ago, thinking I would write the book, but always, written a bunch of books. There was always some other book that was more pressing, would write that. And it wasn't until the piece in 2019 in the New York Times. Somehow I missed the one in 2017. I'm not sure how, but I saw that and I said, okay, this is the time to write the book I've always wanted to write. My publisher was a close friend. We were at an editorial retreat. I've been a professional editor too. On the beach at Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And we're walking out on the beach at night and see some kind of light in the sky. And I just said, you're going to think I need a tinfoil hat, but I've always wanted to write a book about extraterrestrial intelligence and the Christian faith. And he said, write it, I'll publish it. So that gave me encouragement because otherwise I might have had a hard time finding a publisher. And but it took a couple of years to write it.
When you mention paranormal experiences and how they're not necessarily related to the UFO topic, I think more and more people are bringing themselves round to, potentially there is a connection, a relationship there between the paranormal is just the normal that isn't, discovered yet as such, or things we don't quite yet understand. Do you think there's anything to that? When we talk about the paranormal, what is the paranormal to you?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's paranormal and there's paranormal. So it means literally, aside the normal. It's kind of just outside on the perimeter of the normal. So there's certain things that at least the secular world would call paranormal that, as a Christian, I've believed all along. So encounters with demonic powers, even perhaps angelic, good angel kind of experiences. I was once I was Pentecostal for a while before I was Catholic, and I was in a parish a church that was firmly convinced, and I am, that it can happen, that God gives gifts to people that are beyond, kind of the normal stuff that we have. And of course, the Catholics would affirm that too. There are a lot of saints with all kinds of things that we would now call paranormal, that God can give those gifts. And so they're beyond our nature, but still not the kind of woo that some people would think. It's kind of like, so for someone like Padre Pio, St. Pio Pietrelcino, who his lifetime overlapped my own, Italian mystic, what we would call the paranormal was almost normal in his life. It happened so often. So paranormal, depends on where you're coming from. From a secular point of view, it often just means something anomalous or outside of the normal. From a Catholic Christian point of view, it would include things that we consider are given by God and therefore not something to puzzle over necessarily, that he can give us gifts that go beyond what we normally have. It would probably include things that are often demonically inspired. And again, I've had encounters with that, all kinds. So I've written a couple of books about that, not about my encounters, but about what the church teaches. And then there are other things that, as a Catholic Christian, I would say, well, you have to be open to. Maybe it is something we just haven't fully understood. I mean, the whole thing with remote viewing, a lot of folks just dismiss that as they do UAP as all demonic. But the kind of thing that some of the saints have done, that people in that parish, that church I was in before, have done after prayer, being able to see things at a distance, know things inside of people's hearts. You can call that paranormal if you want to. But some people would say ghosts and spirit, ghosts are part of the paranormal. Okay, if you want to include that. But again, for a Christian, we're convinced that the soul does survive after death, that the body goes into the grave, the soul survives. One day there'll be a resurrection, we receive our bodies back again. But that in the meantime, that departed, that human spirit that is no longer connected to its earthly body is what we would call a ghost. And that's all through our tradition. It's in the scripture. It's in all kinds of stories of the saints where they encounter people who have died because God gave them a reason to come back, for some reason to interact with the living. So none of that is, once I came to the place of firm Catholic faith, so much of what we consider paranormal was not unbelievable to me.
And again, I'll state, I've said this many times on the podcast, and it's not a cop-out, but I'm not religious in the slightest, so I've got a very, very broad generic view of religions and, what I kind of pick up here and there, and I've always said each to their own. There's none of them I particularly believe. I've probably got a view that you hear quite often that I imagine is probably in some way wrong, but that most religions are based on something that's has a basis thousands of years ago, so they're all very much variations of a theme. I get all religions have their own deities, but some of them overlap, and various gods and prophets overlap across religions. But I think generally there's a lot of patterns I can see that make sense, that regardless what religion you believe in, sorry, or if you even include your faith in the UFO topic or what you believe in UFOs, the idea that we're connected in some way, that what a soul is, where you go when you die. Are you part of a greater consciousness? Is this an experience you have? And it still just seems like a variation on a theme, and that UFOs in a way is just a whole other religion itself. Can you talk on that? Where am I right? Where am I wrong?
Yeah. Well, it's where do I start? I think in one way, one reason that what we would normally call religion, why you see themes and you see patterns, is that ultimately they're all pretty much asking the same questions. and their faith, their religion, gives an answer to those questions. So some of the questions would be, how did the universe come to be? How did we come to be? And how did I come to be? Is there a purpose in life? Is there something beyond matter, energy, and force fields? How do you know right from wrong? Those are all I used to teach comparative religion courses in college, and those are the kind of questions that prompt religious answers. And so I'd agree they're trying to answer the same questions. I would say, if you look at the whole spectrum, though, you may have some overlap in experience, and certainly in the moral area, but the basic tenets can be really, really different. All the way from the Greek pantheon of Greek gods, none of whom are all powerful or all knowing, but more kind of like elevated humans, to the sense that the Christians and Jews and Muslims would say there's one God who created everything out of nothing. That's really different. You do have, and one of the things I used to point in my courses that, and pretty much, as far as I know, there may be some I don't know about, all the what we call the primal, or at least the traditional religious traditions, the older forms of them, including the primal religions, which would be original Native American, Indigenous, African, and that kind of thing, and European, that you do run into conviction that evil spirits exist. And that's one of the things that I began to see, maybe there is something to this evil spirits, that they may disagree, all these religions, on God and all kinds of other things, but it's amazing, unless you look at some modern version that's been trying to demythologize, so to speak. The traditional versions of all these religions all say, yeah, there's something out there that's malicious, that's not corporeal, that, can come after us. So plenty of overlap in those things. And again, immorality to a great extent. But the most important issues, I think, tend to be different. So, for instance, as a Christian, I would push back some on the idea that's becoming popular in UFO circles, that there's a kind of impersonal consciousness that the universe has arisen from somehow, and that we are all part of that consciousness. I would say, as a Christian, I believe that there is a personal God. He's personal. He's rational intellect. He has a free will. He loves, and that he alone is self-existent, and that everything that is, he created out of nothing, and he created it in love. This is part of what I was talking about in the Soul Foundation Symposium, that he loves us, that we're broken, we need healing. He wants us to be healed. But even when you look at those major things, that still leaves a lot of room for mystery and other kinds of things, other creatures out there like that. But it is different, that it's not the notion that we're all part of a great consciousness, or that the consciousness is part of the universe. It is that he's a personal God. He's not like the Force in Star Wars. He's a personal God, loves, thinks, all those things, and he creates out of nothing. So his creation is utterly different from him, and yet he is utterly present to his creation in every way. And because of that, then he's able to do all kinds of things for us, whether it's spiritual gifts that allow us to see things at a distance, or to know the future with prophecy. So I don't know if that's answering your question or not, but
no, it does, yeah. And like I say, I don't think anyone could ever come on the podcast and convert me to a religion. I think I'm well past that now at 37 years of age, and no one's ever tried, which is wonderful. And like I say, each to their own, because I know certainly when I go to work and work in an office or entertain anyone on the UFO conversation, it very quickly gets the eye rolls and, tuts and little green men conversation. And I imagine anyone of any faith or religion ends up in those same conversations as well. And that's where I think the UFO or religious conversations can be very similar in a lot of ways as well. A few different ways I could take what you said, Paul. I want to bring it back to this first, because I think I'm going to come back to some of the things you mentioned there in a short while. I heard you discuss on another podcast, it might have been about a year ago, I think it was a year ago, Pints with Aquinas.
Yes.
I'll put the link in the description. It was a 3-hour conversation, really interesting. It goes back and forward between religion, UFOs. I mean, that guy knew what he was talking about, and I'm guessing that was a podcast on religion, but you just happened to be discussing your book. So really interesting conversation. Some of it way over my head, other parts of it really interesting. You mentioned on it though, Paul, that the UFO topic, as a civilization, was taken very seriously by us humans going back around 26 centuries. Ancient writers, ancient philosophers all entertained it. And it only seems to be when the US government got involved in the 1940s, we're talking Roswell, atomic bombs and whatnot, that it took a turn. And now people look down on or dismiss the topic, and there's a real fight to bring that back around. And I wonder, first off, why do you think religion now seems to be something that's so powerful worldwide still, as it has been through the centuries, has never had such a knock like that, yet the UFO topic seemed to go the other way so quickly?
Well, I mean, a couple of things. And that is more than half of the book. The first part is about what I call the history of the conversation. So starting with the ancient Greeks and the Romans, before the Christian era, you already had folks talking about these things seriously. And then the early church fathers, we call them the great writers and thinkers of the first few centuries of the church, most of them were very well versed in the Roman and Greek philosophers. And so the questions kind of came to them. And so it is important, yes, to affirm that this conversation was taken very seriously. If I say an introduction of my book, if you want to give me a tinfoil hat, we could have to give it to a lot of other people too. Everybody from Plato to Aristotle to Aquinas and Augustine and Benjamin Franklin and on, Thomas Paine. But if you look at it, and you can see in the book, the conversation is very lively all the way through the Middle Ages, all the way through the Renaissance, into the modern era, into the 19th century, the 1800s. And then finally, kind of around 1950 with Sputnik, the beginning of the space age, you had, especially among Catholic theologians, a lot of talk about it because a lot of people were thinking about the skies. But it was soon after that, within the next generation of theologians, but not just theologians, scientists as well, no one would talk about it. And we have the documents that have been brought out because of the FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, demonstrating that the intelligence community and Department of Defense, it was part of their intention to subject the subject to ridicule, to work with their, what shall I say? I won't say plants, but the folks in the legacy media who will cooperate with them to turn this into a subject of mockery. And even though they couldn't keep it a secret, there have been plenty of whistleblowers, but most of them were dismissed. That's what they were able to do, is to make them look foolish. So that seems to be what happened, that with theologians as well as with scientists, that they mostly wanted to stop talking about it. And that's such a shame. It means that we talk about anomalous phenomena. Well, we are the anomaly. Our generation is the anomaly. Historically, the norm was to talk about this subject very seriously and take different positions. Our generation has been the anomaly, and it's time we get back to taking it seriously.
Why do you think so many folks worldwide, and I would say generally there's a far bigger audience that is more comfortable having a conversation about gods, regardless of your religion, and prophets, stories from the Bible, the Quran, various different religious texts, are far more comfortable with those conversations, and there's far less ridicule than there is about the UFO topic. Why do you think that is? Because again, as somebody who isn't religious, I look and go, and I'm not, don't mean to downplay this, but man in the sky, up in the clouds, where God isn't in the clouds, I get that, but mythical being up there, creates the earth in 7 days, however you want to play that, Noah's Ark, all these stories that people take so literally. And then you've got the UFO topic where you just have to look at it and go, for someone like me trying to have that conversation with someone else, why couldn't something have evolved ever so slightly before us, and it's a couple of hundred or a couple of thousand years more advanced than us, if not more, and it's came here from someplace else, it's been here before, etc., and set your own ending? I don't see why the conversations are so different, yet they still seem to be.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's several things. One is that, because I've often thought the same thing. Look, the kind of classical Christian imagination, Catholic and otherwise, has room for all this stuff because we've got room for God, for angels and demons, and so-called paranormal phenomena that we understand is something from God. That when it happens, unless it's demonic. But so why is that? And the answer I've come to is that, where do I start? First of all, there are a lot of folks who believe that if something's not in Scripture, clearly in Scripture, that it can't be true, can't be real. And of course, that's easily responded to. I'll say, well, look, the Scripture doesn't talk about dinosaurs or duck-billed platypi or microbes or molecules, but we know they exist. So it's not intended to be an exhaustive encyclopedia of everything that exists. The thing I'm finding is that there's a lot of, I just have to use the word ignorance. I don't mean it in a bad way. It just means lack of knowledge, lack of understanding about the Christian tradition itself. People are totally surprised when they find out that very well-respected figures in the Christian, especially Catholic tradition for centuries, have talked about this seriously, and some of them even posited, yes, there's intelligent life, and if not that, they're at least open about it. They don't seem to understand that's part of our tradition. That's somehow been eclipsed, in part because of the modern intellectual movement, beginning with the Enlightenment, away from anything considered supernatural to it has to be scientific. So that I guess the church, Christians have been almost as much affected in certain ways by the culture of scientism, that if science can't explain something, it doesn't exist, as others have. And that's a shame, because again, their religion should push back against that. One of my hopes is that in this conversation, as more and more people who've kind of believed only in what science can show them begin to realize, looking at this topic, there are things out there that can't be measured, that science doesn't seem to have a hold on, that we can say, that's right, let's talk about that, because that's part of what we understand about the world. Don't know if I'm answering your question, but I do think, part of it was that it was not in Scripture. The other, and it's a very human thing I find, is that for a lot of people, if they don't understand something and they don't like it, it makes them uncomfortable, then they just write it off as demons, or in some cases, government psyops. There's not a lot of depth in thinking in that regard. It's kind of a reaction. I understand it. I mean, not everybody has time to read my book with 400 pages and 550 footnotes, but it's lamentable, I think, it's the same, like you said, it's the same kind of reaction you get sometimes by scientists. They don't understand it, but they know science doesn't account for it. So they have to write it off as something they do understand. Hallucination, mental illness, aerial phenomena of a prosaic nature. And I think religious people tend to sometimes do the same thing. Don't understand it, makes them uncomfortable. It's outside the box. Well, how can I give it a cause that does fit into my religion? Well, demons. It's an easy out.
I think the big thing that is missing for me, and again, just for anyone listening to this who might think otherwise, Paul's, you've written a book here for the UFO topic, for how it has its place in Catholic faith, how they can mirror, how they can merge, and it answers and talks about some of those questions. And that's the way you're coming at this, which is great. It's not me having a guest on and arguing with them, about their viewpoint compared to mine. But I'm giving you some of my frustrations, and I'm sure those are echoed by other folks out there as well. Evidence is always thrown at folks when we talk about the UFO topic. Where's the evidence? What's the evidence? And you can show folks any number of videos. They're dismissed as X, Y, or Z. You can talk about your own experiences, and then any number of sightings, reportings. And like you say, when it comes to religion, it seems very much that the evidence, like you say, is in Scripture. So if it's not in this book or written down, then it never happened. A lot of folks, however, tend to say that there's quite a lot across various religions that do or does reference the UFO topic. And I wonder, can you talk a little bit about that? What are some of the main, and you mention it in the book, but what are some of the key figures or prominent members of the Catholic faith over the centuries who have had some kind of either experience or talked about the UFO topic?
I guess the kind of the basic thing we have to see here is that early Christians up until the Middle Ages were deeply influenced by the philosophy of the ancient Greeks, Plato first, and then Aristotle by way of St. Thomas Aquinas. And Aristotle's view of the cosmos in particular did not allow for anything like this, in the sense that taught that the earth was the center of the universe, and then the kind of the realm that was concentric circles in the moon, the sun, the stars, and did not even conceive of a kind of any kind of rocky balls like our planet that could actually have creatures on them. The moon was the exception. I think even Aristotle may have briefly considered the possibility that there could be life on the moon. The closest they got to it was this notion that that the stars were actually animated creatures. They had souls. And so the soul moved what we saw physically of the star around the heavens. So in that sense, I mean, that's basically a form of extraterrestrial intelligence that they did allow for. But for the most part, they didn't even have a notion. They knew of the planets in the sky, but the word planet in Greek means wanderer. They just thought that they were stars that weren't moving around the sky with the rest of the stars. So all that's to say that it took a while for, it wasn't really until the time of Copernicus. He comes along and then with Galileo and others begins to demonstrate, we're really not the center of everything. And you get Christians waking up and saying, well, you know what? That never was part of our religion, really. It's not in the Bible. It's not. It comes from this pre-Christian philosophy. We can give that up and still account for all these things. And so at that time, then you begin to have people like Nicholas of Cusa. He was a really big figure of the 16th century church. He not only was a cardinal, but he was a papal legate, a papal advisor, was a part of the Ecumenical Council, Great Council of Basel. And he wrote openly about this and about how he thought there probably is intelligent life. And he speculated about what kinds on other planets out there. Later on, you get people like a highly respected Catholic visionary, Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich, German, who in her vision sees intelligent life out there. You get people like Padre Pio, St. Pio Pietrelcino. I think I mentioned him before. His life overlapped mine. And he was given to all kinds of visionary things and healing miracles and what Catholics call bilocation, where his body would be in one place and his soul in the other. And we have, again, it's not legendary. It was the same time as my lifetime overlapping. Plenty of documentation of that. But he in particular once was asked in an interview, what do you think about aliens? And he said, he was just like he always was, very direct. What? You think God didn't create any other creatures like us? You think we're the only ones that give glory to God? And he actually said that there were creatures on other planets who had not fallen, who had not been morally broken the way we are. So you get folks like that. You get St. John Paul II, Pope John Paul II, who once was asked publicly by a girl in an audience at a parish in Rome, what about aliens? And he didn't say, oh, that's contrary to the Catholic faith. He didn't say, we don't know. He didn't say any of that kind of stuff. He said very affirmatively, always remember they are God's children too. So that's powerful to me. But even if you go back, so that's the more modern stuff. But even if you go back to before those times, what you do get are affirmations of the possibility, or even affirmations of the existence of other kinds of non-human intelligence besides angels. You get that in St. Augustine, one of the greatest theologians the church ever had. You get it in St. Jerome, who was considered the father of biblical scholarship, both in the 4th century. And they talked about some of the Greek Greek mythological figures as if they were real creatures of some kind that we didn't know fully about, but that they were not angels and they were not humans. And St. Jerome in particular makes it really clear. I'm not just repeating the story that I heard. This is, things happened just a short time ago where one of these things was captured and brought before the emperor. So all that to say, you've got all kinds of figures like that. You've got plenty of Christians more recently, like since the 20th century, that have openly talked about it and affirmed at least the possibility. But so part of that was just and what I'd love to help other Christians do is to say, we need to recover these aspects of our own tradition that do allow for this, and some that even affirm it. And the kind of characters that Jerome and Augustine talked about are what we might now call ultra-terrestrial, something else that shares the planet with us, that's been here a long time. So even though they weren't talking about ETI, extraterrestrial, because they didn't have a notion of planets out there, Augustine was open to the idea, Aquinas was open to the idea of the stars being animated. But then even the early guys were saying, yeah, I think there are other things besides humans and angels right here on planet Earth, and have been. And I think it's important for us to realize that this is the phenomena. We tend to lump it all together, but I think it's a bunch of things. I think it's probably almost certainly some of it's extraterrestrial, but I think some of it may be ultra-terrestrial. Some of it could be angelic. I do think some of it's demonic, and the people who criticize my work most from within the church are ones who say it's all demonic. And, I don't think you can make that absolute claim at all. A lot of the things just don't fit the profile. I know the profile of demonic, diabolical possession in other cases, and most of it doesn't fit that. Maybe some of the abduction scenarios do, but so I can see it overlap. But anyway, it's not all the same thing. I don't think at all.
I'm a bit scared of demonic stuff, ghost stuff. I said, God, that sounds so professional, don't I? Demonic stuff and ghost stuff. They've always scared me since being a kid. I've never liked even like horror movies. I wish I liked horror movies and supernatural films. I struggle to watch them without jumping constantly. But I did take myself recently to see the new Exorcist movie. And again, there's an exorcism performed. The idea of the two young children being possessed, I find all that really scary, and just the idea that these things happen, they have happened within the churches, and the Vatican's involvement or non-involvement and whatnot in some of these stories is kind of fascinating and scary. But like you say, sometimes you look at that, and as I watched that movie, just for that moment, I thought, the UFO lens, and is that really related to what's happening here? It just seems such a stretch, but like you say, it's all still labels being put on something we don't fully understand, or maybe we did understand better some time ago and understand less now, or we just don't entertain the notion, especially in the Western world. I think there are parts of society and parts of the world that still have a far greater spiritual connection to whatever may have come before us or maybe interacting with us. But I wonder, you mentioned those labels, angels, demons, angelic, demonic. Is the problem that they're just being labeled, and almost the commercial idea we have of these things now? When someone says angel, you think robed figure, long hair, wings on their back, and then demon is, Dave Grohl in the Tenacious D video, big horns, all red, devil-like. Is that the problem, that we think of them too boxed in?
Well, one thing about the Catholic faith is that they're what they believe that they can define, what's been revealed by God. They're very careful to define, and then they leave open a lot of stuff for mystery. And so obviously there's still a lot to understand about angels, both the good ones and the fallen ones, the demons. But the Catholic understanding, and I fully agree, is that they were a race. They are an intelligent race, also created by God, created good before the human race was created, and that some of them turned against God in rebellion and then became corrupted in their mind and will, and that they are still allowed to roam, and they come on earth, and they hate us because we're sons and daughters of God. We're in the image of God, and they want to deface us. They want to bring us to hell with themselves. And so it's, in the Catholic tradition anyway, it's very clear what they are. There's, we know they had a beginning. We know that you have good ones and ones that have fallen. We know that they're non-corporeal. They don't move through space. They don't have bodies the way we do, the pure spirit. We know that they know a whole lot more than we do. They've got gifts and powers beyond us. We know that that they do get involved in things on earth. But we also know, and this is part of our faith, that one of the things that Jesus Christ came to do was to conquer that. He has authority as God in the flesh. He has authority over them. And that's one of the things, in the Catholic tradition, when you begin to bump up of these things, that you can make use of that, to find out whether something is demonic or not. If you have an experience like that, you can, I've been involved in exorcisms. I've been consulted in cases of diabolical possession, and the sacraments of the church, the sacramentals and rituals of the church, the name of Jesus, Scripture. If they're truly demonic, they respond to that, and they have to submit to the authority. It may take a while; they resist. But I know this sounds crazy to a lot of your listeners, but it's true. Believe me, I've seen this stuff physically myself. Personally myself. So you can discern that. And what you find is in the history of exorcism even, then you have people who report things that kind of look demonic. They're not really malicious, but kind of poltergeist stuff. And so the church is brought in to make the thing submit and leave in the name of Jesus, and they don't respond at all, and they don't seem to respond in any of the ways that demons do, and they seem to be more prankster than destructive. And that's one reason. I wrote about that in my book too. That's one of the reasons why I think you can see that. St. Augustine talked about it. You can see that as possible evidence that there are on Earth other creatures, also with free will and intellect, who may or may not be fallen as we are, but that they're not demons. If they were demons, then we have experience with demons. We know what to do with them if you have the authority. Yeah. Is that making sense?
No, yeah, it does. And even the earlier part of what you were saying, though, when you say, there is a God and he is, and that's capital H, he, I think there's a lot of like Tom DeLonge. Again, God, this makes me sound younger than I am probably. But what Tom DeLonge says, and you're familiar with Tom DeLonge, I take it, and yeah, what he said, yeah, I'm just assuming. But when he's talked about there's a battle for our souls, and there are entities that are jealous that we have free will, that we are here, and some of these entities or intelligences want to see us prosper. Some are just kind of nonplussed, and others want to see us kind of be negative. They live off of fear. And a lot of that sounds very similar to what you were saying previously. And that's where I look at so much of those stories, as I view them, overlap, because it is just, if you just change the odd word here and there, then you're looking at a phenomenon. Take a label off, instead of angel or demon, say grey, say, God, I don't want to say mantis being. I think, yeah, that's another conversation for another day. But, a non-human intelligence, it substitutes in, doesn't it?
Well, in the sense that people have with similar experiences, have different names for different understandings of what they are. And again, from the Catholic tradition, I would say that whatever else there might be out there, that we would affirm that there are angels created before us, created good. Some of them fell, they're demonic. And then that kind of battle for our souls, as Tom would describe it, is going on specifically with them. But I don't know that we would say that, and that's equivalent to X, Y, or Z. Maybe something different. Maybe in some cases, the religious traditions, like I mentioned before, about all the older traditions talk about evil spirits. So they're seem to be speaking out of experience. So if the experience is similar, then of course they're going to talk about it, and they'll have different names for it and different understandings. So yeah, so to that extent, sure, I think there's a common experience of certain things across religions. And from the Catholic, point of view, I'd say, and at least some of them we can define.
Just to give the
room
list
for a lot of mystery.
There's a lot of wiggle room in this, and this is about something I'm going to mention, Paul. This isn't something I want you to answer because you couldn't. No one could. This is just where my brain goes when you're saying what you're saying, okay? For listeners who wonder what I struggle with inside with some of these conversations, when someone like yourself talks about exorcism, demonic possession, which I believe does happen, as much as I hate watching movies about it, you then think of the UFO topic, and if we've got beings coming here from somewhere else, whatever that may look like, you start to get into the realms of, if indeed both of those things are true, then how does that work? Could another being that wasn't us be possessed by something demonic? And my head just goes to really strange places with that kind of stuff, and it's a conversation for a whole other time, if it could even be had, Paul. I want to keep it a little bit more grounded still, if I can. And a belief I had when I started the podcast, I think, is very, very base amongst many people, is that if we got confirmation tomorrow, the old capital D disclosure, we have an alien race visiting us, we have crashed craft, bodies recovered, etc., that worldwide religions would collapse and it would lead to chaos. And I think when I speak to friends, family, general public, on the topic, that still comes up quite early on in the conversation. That's something the more folks I've spoken to of various different religions and faiths, more and more have came away from that whole idea, because the religious minded folks seem to be the most accepting of this. Is that fair?
For the most part, yeah. And so, for instance, the Vatican, you talk to, the Vatican's a big thing, so you talk to individuals, but certainly folks like the Vatican astronomers, at the observatories that they have are open to talking about these things. And in many ways, even folks like Ross Goulthard has said he's found Catholic figures to be probably the most open to all of this. So I think that's true for a lot of folks. You do have segments, though, of religious populations that, again, are reacting to the whole thing as uncomfortable. I don't like it. I don't understand it. So it's all demons. So, I mean, I'm already, experiencing that a lot. I'll get a pushback from certain kinds of Christians and then Catholics who just, it's all demons. You're leading people to hell by even saying this is possible, that kind of thing. And they will have a hard time, if that comes. Although they already kind of have, some of them, a fallback position that, okay, even if the government comes out and discloses, it's all a red flag. It's all a false flag operation. It's government psyops. They've worked out this entire mythology, modern mythology of how. So what'll happen is the government will come out, say it's real, it's a threat. So we need to unite with other governments of the world and have a one world government in order to fight the threat. And then that's going to set things up for Antichrist to come, possess the world. So they've already kind of worked that out. You have all these fallback positions. Well, even if the government says that, okay, well, what if, we see them flying over the White House or wherever? Doesn't have to be the White House. It could be the Kremlin. It could be all kinds of places. Say, oh, no, that's, what is it? Project Bluebeam or something like that. That's all holograms. Yeah. They figured out all these ways, just like folks who, don't believe in the moon landing or that the earth is flat. They've got all these fallback positions until finally you get to a place where the statements they're making are non-falsifiable. What are you going to say, to falsify it? Because they'll always have something else. So what I'm saying is within the community, I think there'll be plenty of religious people. The surveys that have been done by sociologists all seem to point in that way that most of the folks will be fine. But the ones that have already decided, and with what a Catholic theology, moral theology would call a rash judgment, without having all the facts, they've already decided it's all demonic, they'll have a hard time.
I wonder, how does someone like yourself argue or help the argument that within the US government, there are individuals, organizations who are very religious, and given their beliefs, this is entirely demonic. That's why they are very much against this coming out. They want to keep it secret, and they very much believe, Old Testament type stuff. How do you try and rationalize that conversation for these folks to say that? How do we move it forward? Let me just leave it there.
Well, that's one of the reasons I wrote the book. To be able to say, okay, to understand that, reacting, it's all demonic, all that kind of, because you don't understand it, and it's, and some of it feels threatening. Let's go back and recover elements of the Christian tradition that you may not be aware of, so that you see that this is not something people have feared for 2,000 years as Christians, but that they've talked about rashly and openly, in some disagreements, but that it's only been since the 40s and 50s when the government started getting involved that we developed this attitude of fear and all that kind of thing. You trying to help them to see, and this is part of what my talk at the Soul Symposium was, help them to see that it really doesn't overthrow their faith as it stands. It would lead to lots of questions, and you'd have to imagine more things than maybe you've ever imagined before. But the foundations are still secure. We can account for this the same way we accounted for the Copernican revolution, because that change wasn't really part of the faith, but it did open up all kinds of new possibilities. The problem is most of the folks I know who react that way aren't willing to read a book like the one I have. I've corresponded with some of them that I know personally, and they'll say, "No, I'm not going to read the book. I'm not even going to talk to you. I'm 100% convinced of this. What you're doing is you're leading people to demons, that kind of stuff. I don't even want to talk about it." And so I'm not sure how to help those people except to pray for them. But for ones who are willing to say, okay, let me at least see another side to this, I'd say read my book or read history.
I won't pray for them. I'll judge them silently from afar and make passive-aggressive comments on social media. But yeah, whatever works for folks, I'm sure it all has the same effect. Paul, you mentioned your talk at the Sol Foundation event. Let's talk about that. That was, going back to the middle of November now. We're recording this right at the end of December, folks. How was that experience for you? I'm very much hoping to be at the next one, not as a speaker, for the love of God. They would never have that, unless they go right downhill, Gary Nolan and Peter Scaffish. But I'd love to be there as part of that kind of audience. But yeah, tell us about the experience in your talk.
Oh, Andy was wonderful. First of all, I felt very honored to be there. You mentioned all those great, well-known speakers, and here I am being asked to say, nobody knows me. But it says a lot about Peter and Gary, who are organizing it.
Paul, let me say, Paul, and I never interrupt, but that was my point I made earlier, that I think I said that in the introduction, it had names that we know and also names that we don't yet know. And I think that's the point. This isn't, awakening or contacting the desert, which is look at all these names and buy tickets to see them. Not that that's a bad thing, but this was an event for religious folks, academic folks, scientifically minded folks, military folks, to get together and have a conversation from different aspects of it. And it didn't matter if you'd sold one book or never written a book, but your talk was relevant and had a purpose, or if you're at the top of the food chain and you literally had locked the hangar door to the saucers, it seemed that was the point of it. And that's what I love the idea about it. So sorry to interrupt, but that's why I think it was great. Folks like yourself were there because it's very much needed as part of this conversation.
Well, Peter and Gary, again, you can read the mission statement of Soul, and they want to bring together kind of serious academics, but also policy advisors and all kinds of folks to talk about it in a serious way. And they recognize that especially if part of what they want to do is kind of help prepare the world for a possible disclosure. If you're going to help people prepare for that, the religious communities are a big part of that. I mean, Catholics alone are an estimated 1.3 billion people on the planet. And so they recognize that we've got to have theologians at the table. That's something Lou Elizondo has said repeatedly, said it to me as well, but he said it publicly, that if you're going to have people discussing this, you've got to have folks involved in that in some way too. So that really reflects their breadth of vision, that they would invite me. They had Jeff Kripal, you've already had on, Dinah Pasulka, others to talk about religion, but other kinds of things, fields. And that they would also invite me, because other folks from this position kind of, I don't sign on to any of these beliefs or to any particular religion, and kind of taking a distance, which is fine. But that they knew from my book what I wanted to do, and that was say, okay, if we're concerned about helping people to accommodate this within the parameters of traditional faith, what would it be like to have one person do it for a particular faith? How about pretty much the largest organizational religious organization in the world? And so they invited me, and they knew that some of the things I was saying were going to be different from what some of the other speakers touching on religion would be, but that was fine. And so just kudos to them for even thinking of it, going to all the trouble to do it. When I got there, things started on Friday morning. It was Friday and Saturday. Thursday evening, though, they had speakers and some other people invited to a just wine reception. And immediately, I just felt at home, I don't know how else to put it. All these folks were there coming at it from different directions, but you had the sense, number one, there was a sense of kind of solidarity there, and that we've all got this intense interest. And number two, that we're all seeking the truth, that there really is some kind of truth to this, and each of us is coming at it from our own direction. But the other thing is that you could have a conversation about these matters without worrying, is the other person going to think I need a tinfoil hat? Because they're all coming from, and each one of them, they have their own experiences of how they've been rejected by friends or people who've read their stuff or whatever. But they were open-minded, they were friendly, they were sense, even more than solidarity, maybe a sense of camaraderie that was there. I enjoyed it thoroughly, and not only were the talks just amazing, but the as you might expect, the conversations outside of the talks, not just among the speakers, but others, attendees. And so, sitting down, having dinner or a table with folks I've heard about all my life, not all my life, but all my interest in UFO, and just hear them tell kind of stories behind the scenes about their experiences. And it was wonderful. It's just wonderful. And I met people. The other good thing about the conference that has been talked about much is that at that dinner table, one of the persons there had been one of those who helped choose out of all the many people who applied who would come. And that they intentionally wanted the attendees to have very different, backgrounds and interests, diversity there. And that made for a really interesting audience and for conversations outside. So, my first lunch, I sat down and someone sits down next to me and says, "Can we talk?" I said, "I'd love to talk." Introduced, and he's from Tokyo, and he'd flown in from Tokyo to do this. Had a great interest in this, but he wasn't professionally in anything connected with it. But then he read some of my books on demonology and wanted me to autograph them, and that was just the beginning. So many different people, interesting, all there because they have an interest in it. So I just really appreciate the folks with the symposium wanting to have that kind of diversity in the audience as well as in the speakers. But I learned so much. Oh, I learned so much. Oh my goodness.
I love that you see the diversity in the conversation. I spoke to someone a while back who was organising an event, and they told me that the event that was coming up, and no slight on them at all from this, they were looking to move into more of a mix of military and academic, science, religion, and very much what Saul was. And when their event was announced last year, it was the same, 12 Starseed Ascension folks, and I was like. So yeah, and each to their own. People will listen to this and watch this. Thanks for doing that. I really appreciate it. But they enjoy that side of the conversation, and that's wonderful. There's aspects of it I like. There's some of it I don't like. There's some of it I just don't understand or want to understand enough, depending on my own beliefs in the UFO topic. But I think Saul seemed to really grab that dynamic and that overall arch of what this topic has to be going forward to really grab the mainstream. I'd say to get just before we go into listener questions, Paul, the one person this year above anyone else even who did grab true worldwide attention and headlines was David Grusch. I don't think it's even close, given what he has done since July when he came out of those hearings and the UFO conversation. It's been huge, and that impact. I think I've based that, and I've said before, Paul, on how far-reaching his comments were, because it really hit home in the UK for, albeit a very short candle. It made an impact here in our news, which is rare. And I wonder, what are your thoughts on what David Grusch came out and said over the course of those kind of few months, but also what was the general conversation like, again, from your peers and colleagues who maybe were dismissive of the topic, but then hear David Grusch saying what he said?
Yeah, first of all, I think Dave's a hero, very courageous man. I find him completely credible. Haven't had the pleasure of meeting him yet. I was hoping he would be at the conference. He was only able to speak by Zoom, but I do find him credible, and I know people well who know him well and who say he's a man of integrity. And to be honest, if you've been in the subject, studying it for any time, there's hardly anything that he said. Well, there's a little bit of what he said that was new, but mostly it was just things you say, well, yeah, thank you for saying that, because we've been saying it for years and are thinking that's possible for years. So he did so much to open up things. He's obviously had some more interviews after all that, and he's beginning to say more. So I'm very glad he did what he did. I've had people ask me in podcasts and other things, what I think about him. Of course, with the one thing he did talk about that maybe I shouldn't even bring it up, but was his claim that the Vatican knew about a crash in 1933 in Medina, Italy, near Milan.
Yeah.
And then that in 1944, when the Mussolini government was collapsing, that Pope Pius XII was a liaison with the United States government to get it out of there before it got into other hands, apparently. And folks will ask me that, and I'll say, well, this obviously, from where I am, I can't say that for sure, but it really would not surprise me. I see it as something that's certainly possible. If I put myself in that position, if it happened, I can imagine being Pope Pius XII and say, okay, Mussolini government has fallen, things are chaotic here. The Germans have been known to be interested in this stuff, and they're spiriting things off to South America, whatever. The Russians are definitely interested in this. They keep advancing. The mafia may even be interested in possessing it and selling it to the highest bidder. What should I do? Not that he was in possession of it, but it would make sense to say, okay, of all the possibilities, probably should see if the United States would take it before it gets in the wrong hands. That's just all my speculation. But all that to say, I think it's certainly possible that folks I've talked to, there were people with whatever was revealed several decades ago publicly had problems with that, saying, well, the documentation and stuff is so flimsy and all kinds of things. And even then I was saying, okay, if that's all we've got, it's probably really dubious. But if Grusch actually has access to other materials that the public hasn't had that have convinced him, then that would be a different matter. And I've come to believe that that is the case, that he has other stuff that the public doesn't have access to yet. So all this to say, yes, I think it could be. That's the only claim that he made that really, in the beginning, just kind of took me back and said, "Oh, really? Tell me about that." So I don't know if that's answering your question or not, but that did change the conversation. So as far as the believability, that's the other thing you mentioned. The folks who have pushed back saying it's all demons. The second part of that argument is it's all demons or government psyops. And so you have folks, their fallback position as well. Yeah, he said all that, but he's just part of the government's false flag operation. And how do you argue with that? I mean, you could say, okay, you've got hundreds of thousands of these reports all over the world. People have nothing to do with the United States government. How can you say that's all government psyops? But and then they fall back on the demons argument. So.
Let me ask you on that. You mentioned obviously the Pope who was involved in that potential crash recovery or alleged crash recovery from the 30s, 40s with Mussolini's government. I can see why the head of a church of 1.3, 1.4 billion people would have a say in that secrecy, because that changes a whole conversation for a whole section, if not the entire planet. I wonder if next week, say, President A or Prime Minister B or whoever it may be in charge of a country or a superpower comes out and confirms here's the body of an alien being that we recovered in a crash recently, and here's a crashed craft. It's time to acknowledge this is true, this is real, and there's something here that's not human. What do you think immediately happens in terms of, the Catholic Church? What would the Pope come out and say, do you think?
Well, I'll start off with what I don't think he would say is, oh, it's all demonic. I really don't. I think, just looking at the history of the Vatican and how they operate, it's always very slowly and it's very carefully. Either they would not say anything, or they might say something like, well, we have to leave all this up to science. Or I think there's a possibility they could say, yes, we affirm that that's true. But the one thing I don't think they would say is it's all demons.
What do you think the reaction would be then, as someone of that faith? What would your react? Well, your reaction's probably quite obvious given what you're doing now and your involvement in the UFO topic. But what's the average, person of faith's reaction to that, do you think?
Probably there are a lot of folks I've met that have said, if that happened tomorrow, it wouldn't disturb me because I've just got to put food on the table and pay the bills. So for them, a lot of folks, it's just, oh, okay, yeah, I grew up with Star Wars, that's no big deal. For others, it would be, all right, I know personally of someone who was in a position to, who's very faithful Catholic and active in ministry, and was in a position to witness things that made it really clear there was something going on that was not human, and it threw him into turmoil. So how does my faith account for this? And then turns out he read my book and then got in touch with me and said, thank you for writing it. It's point by point. You answered my questions. I'm at peace now. It's okay. So I think there'll probably be a lot of folks like that who would say, wow, how does this fit into my faith? What does this mean now? In which case I'd be saying to a lot of pastors, you need to read my book so you can answer their questions. But then there would be the others, who just convinced themselves it's all demonic, who would either say it's all government psyops, or even if they were bodies, they would say it's some kind of demonic, thing. It's interesting. Back when the evolution became, something talked about and accepted by the scientific community, and there were certain Christians that just fully, resisted that for various reasons. And the Catholic Church allows for that. It's no problem. But when they began to discover, archaeologists began to dig and discover dinosaur skeletons and things like that, then people would say, okay, this does show things are very old. The earth is very old, and this is back there. You actually had some Christians, I don't know if they're any Catholics or not, but who said, No, actually, those were created by demons and put in the earth so that it would trip our faith. I could imagine some people having a similar kind of reaction now that, oh, you've got a body. Well, okay, some demon created that in order to knock out our faith. And at some point, you just have to say, guys, how far are you going to go to try to hold that position? It's okay. Let's talk about it.
Well, Paul, we'll move into listener questions. I'll say for folks listening on the audio platforms, that's the end of part 1. Unless you're on the paid feeds, you get it all in one go. Little bonus perk for you. But Paul, the book Extraterrestrial Intelligence and the Catholic Faith, Are We Alone in the Universe with God and the Angels, has been available for some time. Is it Amazon the best place to get it for folks? Or if you got a preference, I always like to ask.
Yeah, well, it is with Amazon. I mean, it's the easiest way to get it, but Amazon to the most of the income. But you can get it from tanbooks.com, TANBOOKS.com. That's the publisher. That's my preferred place. But that might not be, if you're not in the United States, Amazon's probably easier. But yeah, you can get it from Amazon as well.
I always like to ask that after one. I can't remember who it was, but a guest way back mentioned that they weren't a big fan of Amazon, and they appreciated, it was the easiest place, like you say, for folks to get it. Support local bookstores and small book. And yeah, I was like, yeah, absolutely. So I always like to ask now. And I'll ask just to finish off before we move into listener questions, Paul. Someone picks up a copy of the book, reads it. What do you want them to take away from it?
Wow. Yeah. I want them to take away from it that, all right, first of all, if they're Christian, Catholic, or any other form of Christian, to be able to look at this topic and say, if there is a public disclosure of this, it doesn't have to overturn my faith. My faith can accommodate it. It has certain things like that in the past. There's room for it. There's still plenty of mystery. We have a lot of questions to answer. But that God is God. That's why I don't refer to any references to beings or entities. I always say creatures, because that reminds us that they have a creator, it's God. And he created it, and he has a purpose for them too. So to put it in that, so kind of don't panic, just relax that. But also, for at least a couple of centuries now, it started with people like Thomas Paine, who was the Englishman who wrote pamphlets in support of the American Revolution. Maybe some folks think he was a traitor in the UK. I don't know. But anyway, he was widely read. He wrote a book called The Age of Reason, and he wrote extensively on this subject. He believed in ETI and made extensive claims that it would destroy the Christian faith once we discovered it. And he's not the only one to say that. And so to those folks, I would say, no, don't think so. People may panic, people who don't understand their faith, people who don't have all the access to the traditions of their faith that are there might panic. But if they take a deep breath and read this book or read other things similar, it's not going to destroy their faith. It doesn't. So that would be the biggest thing. And then for other people just reading over their shoulder, that I'm hoping that as people start who are involved in this have questions about consciousness, that's a big topic these days, and along with that, survival after death, postmortem survival, I would say, within the Western tradition for over 2,000 years, you've had an affirmation of this kind of cosmic consciousness you're talking about, where the world came from. And for 2,000 years, an affirmation that, yes, the soul survives the body, and there'll be a resurrection, and there's a heaven, and there's a hell. I would encourage you not just to rule that out as if you somehow gotten past that, but to take another serious look at it. People are seriously looking at Hindu and Buddhist, other Eastern traditions to try to understand this. Don't rule this out. It's, I found it convincing, and I think others could too.
Well, thank you, Paul. We're going to go straight into listener questions in just a moment. If you've checked out part 1, make sure you listen to part 2. If you're not on any of the paid feeds, it will be out in a couple of days' time. A lot of really interesting questions to come up. Stuff I've not touched on that folks might have wanted me to is going to come in here. And that way I can blame them for some of the awkward questions I'm going to have to ask you, Paul. But thank you very much if you've listened to part 1, and look forward to seeing you all in part 2. This is part 2, Paul. Hi. So, Paul, first off, we'll go through some of the Patreon questions and then some of the YouTube viewers. Question first off from Stephen Davies. Stephen asks over in Patreon, what is your thoughts, Paul, on the Chris Bledsoe story? One of the most famous stories in ufology, UFOs, but also has quite a deep religious aspect to it.
Yes, I'm. I'm not as familiar with it as I should be. There's been so much to learn in the last couple of years, and in fact, I only live a few hours from there. I'm right near the North Carolina line of Georgia, so may even see if I could go visit there. So I don't want to say too much without being too deep into it. I was just watching your podcast with Jeff Kripal, and some of the concerns y'all raised, I think, are some of the concerns I have. I do think he's trying to fit his experience into as Jeff said, a more conservative Christian experience. I'm not sure how well that works, especially talking about the lady. I would urge people not to associate that with the Virgin Mary because of the things that this lady says. So mostly, I just have to say I can't take much of a position on. I guess I'll stop with that.
Yeah, I'd be interested though if again it is one someone like yourself would have to dive into, because you wouldn't want the keynotes version of it. I think I could say you've got a guy here who had what sounds like an incredible experience, which then continued through himself and his family. There's a heavily religious aspect of this experience, and it wouldn't do it justice. So for me, definitely, I've interviewed Chris Bledsoe and Ryan Bledsoe. So if you get a chance to listen to those, but lots of people have spoken to the Bledsoes. Lovely people. Again, it's down to you what you believe, but from your point of view, I'd be very interested if you get the time to what you think of that particular story and experience and ongoing experience, given what it is. But it would be very easy to dismiss it. But given the cast of characters, and I don't mean that in an offhanded way, that have been involved from various organizations and agencies, they're not just friends with lots of these people, for bar mitzvahs and weddings and everything else in between. So, yeah, it's an interesting one. I'll leave it there as well, Paul, but I'd be interested to know your thoughts. From one Paul to another, Paul Eyre asks, of all the world's religions, including smaller indigenous people's beliefs, which one do you believe can most easily acknowledge a non-human intelligence, and which one do you think would struggle the most with the eventual and undeniable truth of the existence of a non-human intelligence? That's one of those ones I was glad I didn't have to ask.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that I would choose one. Among Western religions, I do think, the Catholic Church is, not the only one to see this. Like I said, Russ Goldhart has said it too before, that I think at least at the upper levels of the church, there's much more openness to it and willingness to accommodate if it's the truth. And I get that from, emails and stuff I get from readers where they're Catholic astronomers, college professors, whatever. You would still have that segment that does not, because they think it's all demons. Aside from that, Islam, as I understand it, already does have references in its sacred literature to life out there, so shouldn't be much.
I've spoken with folks I work with who again have told me exactly the same thing. Really open to the conversation. Yep. Yeah.
The Mormon tradition, I talk about this in my book here. The Mormon tradition has references to life on other planets. I would think, Hinduism would be really open to it, because they already have such a panoply of gods, and they've been known traditionally for kind of say, "Oh, here, we'll put your god on the shelf too." I mean that in a good way, that they've been open to kind of bringing all that in. So I can't imagine they'd have too much trouble. The primal religions, the indigenous religions, I think probably in certain ways might be the most open. They have lots of traditions, but not usually a tradition of kind of highly articulated, defined doctrine, so that they wouldn't have as much to fit it into. They would just have the cultural experience that talks about beings from the sky, often, and that kind of thing, and other spirits.
Let me ask you then, Paul, because I think that is a difficult one to answer, what one would struggle with it, because so many religions seem to at least have a theme or variation of acknowledging something else out there or being possible. Is there any more generic element of religion across the board that would either be slightly contradicted by a non-human intelligence, or may struggle the most, or any elements you can think of a general populace might struggle with if we find out we've got this non-human intelligence here?
Yeah, I would say, within the Christian tradition, there's a tradition actually highly influenced by the Enlightenment that's wants everything kind of very rational, worked out very logically. I won't mention specifics, but that don't leave a lot of room for mystery and don't have a lot of humility when it comes to trying to understand the world, the parts that we don't understand. And I think that runs across several different denominations. And I think those are the folks that will already have the hardest time. Without realizing it, they imitate some scientists, not all, but some scientists in this attitude that if you can't measure it and, handle it with your hands, that kind of thing, then you got to reject it. I think I meant to say this in the early part of the broadcast, that one of the things we do have to understand is that so many people, scientists and others, have rejected this whole thing because so much of it's based on witness testimony. And they say, you can't put it in a lab, you can't test it, it's not repeatable necessarily, so we can't really say much about that. And I've heard several scientists say that. But the truth is, you get outside of it. I think Jeff Kripal was kind of touching on this too. You get outside of that kind of scientific box, and you realize how much of what we know, according to the testimony of witnesses, almost the entire realm of history, you can't prove scientifically. You have documents and that kind of thing. And so you have to accept that, the testimony of witnesses. And there's certain standards, and it's called historiography, the art and science, you might say, of writing history, about what's more credible and what's not. And the same is true in most religions. So much of what we have is not something, science, modern science wasn't even around when it started, that we have it through witness testimony. The resurrection of Jesus Christ is something that's amazing how many people saw it, the documents that document it. If we have to reject, if we say we can only know what we have according to human testimony, even first-person testimony, we got to give up most of what we know. 4th century, so 16 centuries ago, St. Augustine was making the same point in his book, The Confessions. It's his autobiography. I'm writing a podcast commentary on it now. And he says, you know what, people complain that we depend too much on authority, but think about how much you take on authority. How about places you've never been? How about things that happened in history? How about the circumstances of your birth and who your parents are? All of that, really important information you take on the testimony of other people. So I just, want to press back gently on people saying, well, all we've got is testimony. That's really important. It's important to human life in general.
Yeah, people go their whole lives believing their parents are their parents, and then they turn 40 and just on a whim they find out they were adopted, or actually their father that raised them wasn't their biological father, or something like that. And it's paradigm changing, but doesn't mean it's not true. Just you believed one thing your whole life because of reason A, and then you find out something that changes that. So yeah, it's a really interesting point.
So anyway, I'm just saying, so we can't just reject out of hand, whether we're talking about religion or UFOs or anything else, history, anything else like that all we've got is witnesses, especially when you're talking about thousands of them. That's not an adequate way of knowing certain things to say only by science.
The next question from David, you've kind of answered earlier, but I'm going to just give a little bit of a different spin on it. So what David asked was, how much credence does Paul give to the notion of pushback on extraterrestrial intelligence topic due to the idea that they're really demonic forces out to deceive, and particularly in the US and the US government, where there's a strong right-wing Christian element? And we talked about that, Paul, aspects of the US government. This is demonic. We don't want it out there. I wonder, from your point of view and your unique point of view, in what way would a quote-unquote demonic force or mischievous force or, trickster force be trying to deceive us? Can you put that in your words? Because I think that's something I hear quite a lot, but I don't always know exactly what they mean.
Yeah, I don't always exactly know what they mean either. It's apparently, I can't know this directly, but from folks like Lil Elizondo and others have talked about it, that some of the folks in the military with a particularly particular Christian point of view. You could call it fundamentalist. I don't like to throw that word around too much, but that are convinced it's not in the Bible. It's stuff that seems paranormal, therefore it's demonic. That seems to be their argument in their case. Let's see. I'm going to make sure I get the question right. So you're saying...
Let me ask then, what are there examples of what a demonic deception would be like within the Bible, for example, that I could try and relate to modern day? Why would whatever this is be trying to deceive us, or how would it be trying to deceive us, if that makes more sense? Sure.
Kind of two trains of thought, I think, on that. One is that because there are so many folks involved in UAP studies who have, shall we sometimes exotic religious beliefs, maybe I don't mean as a pejorative term, but taught courses on all kinds of things like that, that would contradict the faith they have, then they're making this leap of logic. It's not logical at all. That, okay, since you have people involved in that who believe in this must be demonic attempts to convince people to stop being Christian and embrace these other ideas. That's one. The other is a little more recent, but it's becoming a very vehement and vociferous group of folks who are saying they're very involved with apocalyptic speculation, the end times, the end of the world. And they're saying, I think I mentioned this briefly, that the reason the government is doing all this and this deception is that they're trying to instill fear in us so that when finally the government says we need a one world government, that we'll all agree, sure, out of panic, that's the only way we're going to handle this alien invasion. And then that'll be a setup for the Antichrist, who rules the world and persecutes the church and represents the devil and acts some part of the devil. I mean, it's a very complicated mythology. To me, it's superstitious almost, but those would be a couple of the reasons why people are, what kind of deception they think that is. That it's either going to lead up to Antichrist who's going to persecute the church, or it's you can't disconnect it from a lot of the other kinds of exotic religious beliefs out there that reject the church.
Question from Fred. Fred asks, if angels and demons live in the spiritual realm, but our experiences is that angels or aliens are physical beings, how can folks argue that angels or aliens are demons? Does that make sense?
Yeah, what they're arguing, and again, I don't agree, but because I would say, yeah, if you find aliens have bodies like the ones that people are claiming that they have, then that proves right there they're not, at least traditional Christian understanding of an angel or demon. They don't have bodies. But I think what they would be saying is that the aliens don't exist, and therefore whatever's happening is something that the demons are trying to pull over on us. So they appear in the sky. They have the abduction things where they, appear as something else. They don't look like demons would normally look like. They look like aliens. Whatever kinds of things, that it's all the demons trying to do that. So even with those alien bodies, like I said, it's almost like the folks who didn't want to believe in the dinosaurs that probably would go so far as to say, well, demons created that in order to trick us. I don't know that anybody said that yet about the bodies from Peru, but I wouldn't be surprised if someone starts saying that.
Is there any religious worry? And I think this goes back to the idea of religions collapsing, if we had some kind of confirmation. If an extraterrestrial race, and this is quite an extreme question probably, Paul, but I'll probably have to ask it for my own sanity, I think, that if we found out there was an ultra-terrestrial race and they confirmed, we are here, we've been here a long time, or another entity tells us they've been on this planet thousands of years before us, they've influenced us, they've been here, and they say that our idea of religion is all wrong, that it's largely based on their interference throughout the millennia. And, would that change religions in general, do you think? Or is it still the idea that would be dismissed?
Yeah, I think so. Folks would say, well, aliens can get it wrong just as humans can. And just as, if someone from another religion in the world came and talked to me and said, no, you got it all wrong, you Catholics, you Christians, it's this, and this, that I'd say, okay, let's talk about that. But it wouldn't just right away, oh, no, he's got to be right. that's why, the whole thing about genetic interference and stuff, when I hear that, and people say, the big question this is raising is not who are they, but who are we really? And, is there, I think you've had probably one of the folks on your podcast before, he was told by folks in the intelligence community and classified settings or whatever, that they had been here and they had interfered with our genetics and that kind of thing. That's one where I would say, okay, I really need some data on that.
Well, on that one, Lou Elizondo himself mentioned the idea that around 70,000 years ago, he mentioned there was some sort of change in our genetics where we got a bit of a boost a bit of a boost on.
And so for that, I would say, okay, why go to aliens on that one? The Christian teaching, understanding is that, at some point there was something that happened to whatever creatures were there that would have pressed them in the direction of what we are now, a special creation by God. There was a time when people would jokingly talk about the God of the gaps. And what they meant was that when science would discover something, and it's beginning to show that they thought God was not necessary for all this, instead of thinking that that's just how God did it through natural processes. And there would be a gap in their knowledge or understanding. And some Christians would jump in and say, see, it was a miracle. See, it was a miracle. And they say, God of the gaps, just give us time to figure it out. I'm seeing the same thing happen with aliens. It's the aliens of the gaps. So there seems to be some kind of boost genetically, that kind of thing. I just have to ask, why in the world would you go to aliens on that? There could be very natural explanations. It could be that, in keeping with the Christian tradition, that God intervened, even if it wasn't miraculous, but just did something to create what he was planning to create. So to me, that's not convincing evidence at all. It's, this evidence that something happened, but to attribute it to aliens, boy, I wouldn't go there first.
I'm thinking of what you mentioned there, the Giorgio Tsoukalos Ancient Aliens meme, where he does the aliens, so yeah, it's interesting. Fred asked a few questions. We've answered most of them, to be fair, within the body of the interview. So let's jump on to Peter. Peter Earnshaw loves to send in a question. So thank you, Peter. The Catholic Church still conducts exorcisms and trains priests on how to exorcise demons from human hosts. Can Paul elaborate? And we touched on this earlier, but let's go into it, Paul. Can Paul elaborate on any relationship between extraterrestrial / non-human intelligence and demonic possession? Where do you sit on that one?
Yeah, I mean, it's part of what I was saying before, that I think, first of all, I think that what we're encountering out there is a whole bunch of different things, some of which we don't understand at all, some maybe a little, and that there are in some cases, there seems to be, to me, as someone who's familiar with the exorcism process, that kind of thing, and classical cases of demonic possession and oppression, sure seems to me to be some cases that fit the demonic profile, you might say. So some of the abduction experiences where the creatures are malevolent, where they injure the person, where they take them against their will and bring them back. And I'm not saying every account like that is demonic, but I'm saying I could see how you could interpret some of those in that way. Sure seems to fit the profile. I think it was, I don't know if I want to say his name, I may be getting wrong, but I think it was James Lakatsky who was talking recently, I think on the Weaponized podcast, about experiences having to do with Skinwalker Ranch. And first of all, I want to say that the Catholic Church, Catholic teaching takes very seriously the notion of a curse, that it opens a door for demonic activity, and you don't have to be a Catholic to do the curse. And so in Skinwalker's history, there is the tradition that one Native American tribe cursed another one, and that's somehow connected to this. And that, to me, that seems quite possible. Some of the things that go on there sure seem to fit the profile, but the one that was clearest to me, and I sure hope I'm not misquoting, but as I recall, Mr. Lakatsky said, or Dr. Lakatsky said, that at some point something came on him, he kind of froze, and it began speaking through him. That's about as classic a description of demonic possession as you can get. Maybe it wasn't demonic possession, but I can see why some people think, okay, it's that, but what I keep saying to him is, you can't say it's all that. There are too many things out there, and so many things don't fit that profile at all. Those cubes with the spheres inside of them that the Navy pilots thought, you're going to say, what's that got to do with demons or anything like that?
Yeah,
so some overlap, but I'd say most of it just seems to be something else altogether.
Yeah, Skinwalker Ranch, there's a lot of that, and the hitchhiker effect, very much.
Mhm.
You could say that as kind of poltergeist type activity. Thomas Winterton talked
Mhm.
about events happening at his family home with his wife and child. George Knapp said the same thing, that he and his wife both had hitchhiker effect. You know, again, you can replace a lot of what that sounds like is happening to be poltergeist type activity, going off the classic, you know, movies or descriptions, whatever that might look like. So again, as we've mentioned, Paul, labels one thing, you know, one man's X is another man's B, you know, there you go. It's the same type of thing. Another question from Peter. Now, he touches on something we mentioned earlier, but I just wonder if you can expand on your thoughts on the last part of it. So he mentions David Grusch talking about the Italian crash in the 1930s, Mussolini government collapses, and then apparently the Pope gets involved with the US and they move that object out of there. But he asks, do you think, for example, as the President of the United States would get briefed on the UFO phenomenon, it's just as likely the Pope would get similar briefings to this day?
I think so. I mean, I really do. As others have pointed out, you know, for a long time, the Vatican has had its own kind of information network, if you want to call it that, surveillance, whatever, worldwide. And there are lots of things in the archives, you know, but so they've had information coming to them for a long time about all kinds of things. And this kind of information, because to many it resembles some kind of spiritual stuff going on, it would make all kinds of sense that if somebody experienced that, say, wherever you're in Africa or Italy or wherever, that they would go and talk to their priest about it. And then the priest might talk to the bishop, and it would just go on up the chain. There might even be a word out at some point that if you have experience like this, we want to know about it. So I'm not saying I know that for sure. Of course I can't. But I do think it would make sense that the Vatican would be interested in these things, might even collect stuff about it in the archives. It would just be a natural interest for them. And it would be natural for people to report it. I mean, I've talked to others who said, yeah, I had an experience, and first thing I did is went to my priest and say, how do I figure this out, and how does it get in with my faith? So they're going to talk about it to spiritual leaders, and those leaders are, I think, eventually going to be talking about it on up the chain.
And again, it makes sense, as you say, the president right now, Joe Biden, is talking to 300 or 400, 500 million Americans on whatever he's talking about, but that message is relevant to X amount of Christians, you know, or folks, the Catholic faith in the United States, that is relevant to folks around the world of that same religion. So if he's the head of a religion of 1.4 billion people, then of course that's someone who's going to relay that message, as is any other kind of spiritual leader like that. So that makes sense. A question from Steve. Steve says, the Catholic Church has already put thought into aliens and non-human intelligence throughout the centuries, though the Catholic Church goes to great lengths to inculcate beliefs and dogma. He says is it laity, Laity? Is that laity?
Laity. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, laity. I've never heard that word before. Sorry, Steve. So beliefs and dogma to the laity. There still often remains a disconnect. Lay understanding of the faith understanding is imperfect. Regardless of what theologians, priests, and church authorities have said about non-human intelligences, it might still be a large undertaking to communicate this to the worldwide laity. I'm guessing that just means populace. What does Paul have to say about this?
Yeah, laity just means people who are not ordained.
Okay,
so they were not priests, deacons, bishops. Yep. So if I understand the question, you're saying how might the church?
So it's still a large undertaking. Regardless of what theologians, priests, and church authorities have said about ET, it still might be a large undertaking to communicate this to the worldwide laity. What does Paul have to say about this? Yeah,
I would say, again, you have a lot of people who just aren't interested. They're going about their daily lives, and they tell me this all the time. You have other folks who are interested and would be willing to read a book like mine, and so I'd encourage them to do that. It's because it just brings together, in 400 pages, very careful documentation of the tradition of all this and what theologians have thought, and then how I would present all these things. But for a lot of them, it's just going to have to happen by some kind of public disclosure that they respond to. Because I don't think, I could be wrong, but I don't think that the Catholic Church in particular will be the one to get out in front and say, okay, we've known this much. they're probably going to wait for one or more of the secular governments to say something first. So in the popular culture, books like mine could help. There's some documentaries probably being made that might help. But in the end, a lot of folks are going to need something more than that to have their minds open to.
A good podcast with a Scottish host, that'll help.
Of course.
No, God help them. God with a small g. So a good question to follow on from, actually, I think, and this goes on to the YouTube questions now. Question from Peter says, funnily enough, I've been thinking about what if it's the Vatican itself that makes the first move with disclosure. It would take it out of the hands of partisan governments, but could upset some other religions or belief systems. On the other hand, it would placate the Christian elements in the American government. He thinks it would be the best solution. What are your thoughts on that, Paul?
Well, I'd love to see that personally. I mean, at this point, I've said before, I'd just be thrilled with the Vatican making a statement in response to the kind of things that people are throwing at me. The Catholic Church doesn't take a position on it because so much of what they say about the demons, they build it on their conclusion that it's contrary to Catholic teaching. It's not. It's not. So that I would be happy with that, just so that those people would stop saying that it's not contrary, that it's contrary to Catholic teaching. More than that, I would love to say, I'd love to hear the church say, we haven't said anything officially about it, but it is possible. That would be great. But for me, the best of all, if it's true and if they know, would be for them to some degree or another take the lead and say, yes, this is it, and we've got a lot to learn about it. That would be great. I'm sure whoever knows, if they do know, just like in our government, they have the reasons for thinking it's not time yet, or that somebody else needs to do it. But that's just my personal opinion. I'd love to see them make some kind of statement, take the lead on that.
That would be very interesting. Be a great movie or a TV show at least. Mm-hmm. I see that scenario being quite unlikely still. I just couldn't see it not being one of the superpowers. China, Russia, US obviously being the lead one. But
or even one of the developing nations, even one of the developing nations. Yeah. What if Brazil finally, or Mexico, what if those finally came out and said, yeah, we got all this stuff and the Americans wouldn't let us talk about it, but we're going to anyway. Finally.
I mean, some folks would argue, and God, I don't know if I want to bring this up, that they tried that recently in Peru with the Peruvian mummies in the Mexican Congress. I can get Jaime Maussan on the podcast to talk about that. Just given how ill I've been for the last few weeks, it's not been one I've wanted to look at too much. But if folks would like to hear that in the new year, give me a shout, and I can look at arranging that, because that's an interesting conversation, and it would be respectful, of course. But is there still an element of, if it is that kind of smaller, and that was my point, Paul, that imagine those Peruvian mummies were or are genuine, okay? Is there a PR disaster waiting to happen with it being done in the wrong way, in the sense that people will just dismiss it, or it could go badly, and that's why it has to be handled by, the kind of the church, or, the head of state for the US, Russia, China?
It could be, but but those latter folks are sure taking their time, right? I mean, they've got... so many, especially the U.S. government, so many factions there that don't want this to come out at all. But,
and I think even if and when it does, and I'm sure we're going to get some more information in the coming months, maybe not full capital D disclosure, but we'll get something. I think just given what we've gone through in the last 3 years with COVID pandemic and all that stuff, there's still going to be huge elements of the populace who just don't believe it. You mentioned earlier about flat earthers, or all those kind of things, where there gets to a point where someone's arguing, they can't argue anymore, so they just decide, I'm not going to listen to reason, or I'm not going to choose to believe it. And I think you could come out and say, we've got proof of an alien presence, and there is an element of society that just won't have it, and it'll be rife on social media. I can see the posts already.
All the surveys show, in America, that confidence, trust in the U.S. government, or in government in general in the United States, is just about at its lowest point ever. And that's not just government authorities, but other medical authorities after the whole COVID thing. political authorities, all kinds of authorities. So, I think there are a lot of folks who would just say, yeah, actually, I had a friend tell me that another friend, I won't mention who it was, when he heard about my book, he had said, yes, aliens brought to you by the same people who brought you the COVID pandemic. And what do you think about COVID? You think, okay, I get their thinking. They felt betrayed by the government. They felt misled by the government. And so they think that's just another case of that.
Well,
there'll be a lot of that to discuss.
That was the meme during COVID, wasn't it? That up next is aliens, and I think that went worldwide everywhere. It was they're behind the curtain, ready to come out. So, and anyway, this is not a COVID podcast or political broadcast by any means, as I get accused of sometimes. Even though I hate all politics and anything like that. So yeah, not for me. But yeah, that's it. I'm Scottish. I hate everyone equally, so that's the best way to be. Question from Patricia. Says, thank you very much, Andy, for your work. Oh, I never read that out. I don't know why I did. Sorry, I hate praising myself.
That's good.
Yeah. Oh God, no. That's why I go into my wife, Nick. She'll soon get that out of me.
They're good at that. Yeah.
Yeah. My question to your guest is his opinion on the supposed stigmata the Catholic institution declares St. Francis of Assisi received, compared to what in reality seems to have happened to him, and that is a close encounter with orbs that, as a result, made him ill. This was declared by Chris Bledsoe as well as Dr. Diana Pasulka. These declarations seem to have been given to them from the Vatican itself. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, well, again, I don't want to try to view everything in the Catholic tradition through the UAP lens. I don't think that's a good way to approach it. There were all kinds of amazing phenomena going on when he received the stigmata, but apparently he and the people around him and the church ever since had a particular understanding of, that it's unusual, but that through the ministration of an angel, God was giving him the stigmata. We don't need to go looking for, UFOs or something else there. Let me say this, people say, we haven't touched on this. They'll say, well, in the book of Ezekiel, the prophet Ezekiel, and you have this thing out there that looks mechanical, and it's wheels within wheels, and it's got eyes and wings and stuff. And so that's got to be a UFO, right? Well, let's step back from that. What if one of the things most of us in this, conversation agree on today is that you can't automatically dismiss witness testimony that they've been abducted, right? That what often happens is when they try to tell somebody, the person they tell doesn't believe in UFOs or aliens, but they do believe in something else. So they'll reinterpret as that. So they believe in hallucination or mental illness, or they see something land. They say, well, I don't believe any of that, but I do believe in swamp gas and Venus. And so whatever they thought it was actually this. So they dismiss what that person thought because they don't believe in the things that person thought, and they put their own beliefs as substitutes. I think it's the same thing with passages like Ezekiel. It's really disrespectful to the folks who recorded the vision and the tradition that handled it and brought it down, because for Ezekiel and for the readers of the book, it was not unidentified at all. It was a likeness of the glory of God coming down on a throne. And so I don't think we should go there first and say, well, what really happened was it was a UFO, because I don't believe in God or I don't believe in angels, but I do believe in UFOs. So that's what it must be. I don't think you have to look at the context. You have to look at the person who had the experience. So anyway, I think it's the same way with experiences of Fatima, the apparition of the Virgin Mary in Portugal, early 1900s. I think it's the same case with St. Francis. I don't think it's wise to go look at that and say, oh, well, that somehow resembles UAP stuff today, so that's got to be what it is, when the context itself demands something different.
I spoke to a gentleman, and I can't remember who it was or the name of the organization, so please reach out again if you still listen to the podcast. Last year, I think it was in the summer, he worked at an institute, something to do with religion. That's how bad my memory is. And he had a big interest in the UFO topic, was writing an article about that and religion. I think it was an educational type of institute, and he brought up within the conversation back and forward with me that he didn't believe the Ezekiel's real experience was anything to do with UFOs, and he told me why at the time, and I can't remember, so please reach out to me. But interesting you bring that up, Paul, because he had the same thought, that as much as there are things he believed within the Bible that reference potential UFO events, if you want to call them that, he didn't think Ezekiel's wheel was one, and people were looking too much into that as being that sort of event. So that was just interesting you brought that one up.
Mm-hmm.
Final question then from Strange Fractal, and this I think is a nice way to kind of sum things up, Paul, as you've mentioned this in a couple of different ways, but what kind of statements might you make to religious communities to encourage them to embrace disclosure through the lens of their prospective spiritual teachings?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of what I talked about at the Soul Symposium, that first of all, that we need to give ourselves to studying the evidence that's out there. A lot of the folks who will say to me, it's all demons or whatever, I say, well, have you actually read anything like, In Plain Sight by Russ Coulthard? Have you read any of these other books or things where you look at serious research into it, journalistic and otherwise, or you look at the scientific evidence or the, some of the sightings with all the different sensing materials to you? You need to give some kind of weight to all of that. And they'll always say, no, I don't know any of that. I don't want to read about it. So the first thing I would say is, folks, you need to, whatever your religious tradition, you need to pay more attention to the amazing amount of cumulative evidence that we have of things going on out there, that they're real. Second, that I would encourage you to look within your tradition, as I encourage Catholics to do, and even non-Catholics to look into the Catholic tradition, to see that this conversation has been going on and that we have all kinds of things that make room for this, so that it's not contrary. I mean, I've been accused of teaching contrary to the tradition, the Catholic tradition, when actually I'm recovering things from the tradition that many other folks have lost. Another thing I say is that this world that God has given us is very full of mystery. It's bigger than we can imagine. It's more complex, nuanced, and that often for religious people, there's a failure of imagination, I would call it, where their imagination isn't up to the task of encountering all the mystery and the amazing complexity of what God has in fact given us. And so they need to begin to stretch their imaginations and to see that they can't always connect the dots the way they always have. And then finally, I encourage them, especially Christians, but I think it would be the case in other traditions as well, that to maintain a sense of humility, a sense of wonder. And I define wonder as humility in the face of mystery. Humility in the face of mystery. Certainly that's part of the Catholic tradition. I think it should be part of all religious traditions, recognizing that there are mysteries we don't understand yet. We don't have it all. Even if we feel sure that we have certain parts of the puzzle, there's always stuff that we don't have yet. And for Christians and for Jews also, I would say, go back and look at the book of Job. Look at the God that Job worshipped and that we say we worship too. And that when he was making complaints and about how things were and that kind of thing, God answered him out of the whirlwind and said, Job, where were you when I laid the foundations of the world? Where were you when I created everything? Where were you when I threw the stars out there and all these other things, the Orion and the Pleiades? Do you understand any of that? Do you know the ordinances, the laws, so to speak, of the heavens? And Job realizes, oh my gosh, I've been presumptuous about all this. And he falls on his face and says that we need a kind of remembrance that, that God is, he's creator, he's God, he can do what he wants. And I mean, whatever's in keeping with his character and whatever's not inherently impossible. So let's be humble about it. Let's don't think we've got it all figured out. So I'd say all of those things probably for any religious tradition to keep in mind.
And I think that's good advice for anyone who even just is involved in the UFO topic. I think in the UFO topic, everyone has their own, metaphorical church they worship at, or their own belief systems, their own figures they look to. Some of them borderline on worship of certain individuals across the board. But I think you're right that you have to just be, sensible, logical, be respectful of other people's beliefs, and try not to put all your eggs in one basket. Or you end up with kind of egg in your face potentially. But yeah, I think there's a lot of different conversations happening out there, and especially, like I say, in the UFO topic, where we don't have the answers and we're all kind of looking to those, like you said with religion at the start, Paul, we're all kind of looking at those same questions or asking the same questions just in different ways, aren't we?
We are, and even science is that way. I mean, I'm a professional historian. Historical theology is my field, and so I look at especially the history of Christian faith, but I've also looked at the history of science. And one of the things you find, Thomas Kuhn, the nature of scientific revolutions, that you do get these paradigm shifts in science history. That it's also possible for scientists to become dogmatic about certain things. People like Avi Loeb and others are running into that, where we don't want to talk about it, we know exactly what's possible, what's not. The scientists also have to have some humility about this and to realize. I mean, look at things like quantum theory. Oh my goodness, it's the kind of cutting edge physics. The possibilities that opens up. We have to be humble about that. We have to say, no, we don't have it all figured out. Tell me what you're thinking.
Absolutely. Paul, it has been wonderful speaking with you, and definitely have to get you back on next year in the new year as well. Is your foray into the UFO world finished now with the book, or is there more to come from you? Well,
a lot depends on what happens. I mean, I'd love to do a revised edition of the book now. It's been 2 years since so much has happened in the conversation since then. I've even discovered things, historical documents that I didn't know were there before that would add to the conversation. I think I'm going to be writing an article for a science journal soon, a science and religion journal. Going to probably be writing some more articles about it. But a lot depends on what groups like the Soul Foundation does, if they want to continue to open up the conversation about UFO and religion. And just so much could happen. What if we had a public disclosure this year? I think I'd be talking to a lot of people, probably having people want me to come talk.
Well, I tell you what, if you don't do that revised edition, then jump on the podcast and we can look through those historical documents and you can discuss them and put them out there for folks. But Paul, it's been well worth the wait. Thank you very much for spending your time with us today, especially at this kind of time of year. Hope you have a lovely new year when it comes as well.
Andy, what a pleasure it's been. I've enjoyed your podcast for so long. I think you're one of I'm not just brown nosing here. I think you're one of the best interviewers out there. I love your humility. I love your good questions. You're respectful. You give the guests a lot of time to talk and all those ways. Just wonderful interviews. Please keep at it. Keep doing the good work you're doing, and I'll be following you.
I'll agree with you. Humility is one of my main things, and also I am one of the best interviewers. No, I'm joking. Thank you for saying that, Paul. I appreciate it, and we'll speak very soon.
I mean it.
That is all for this week's show. Thank you very much for listening. Please remember to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. You can like, retweet, and subscribe. That would all be very much appreciated. The shows are being uploaded onto YouTube as we speak more and more. You can sign up at patreon.com/thatUFO podcast to access the show ad-free as well. Please get in touch on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, That UFO Podcast. Of course, on Twitter, it's at UFO UAPAM. And again, folks, as always, keep looking up. You never know what you might see.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little around. Meditative game of state full on meta. Can't imagine how it could have been any better. I got to the top of the stairs and there he was. Like, you awake? I was about to abduct you, cuz. I jumped back and nearly kissed myself, and I climbed out the window after the elf, and I woke up in my bed and there was something on my head and everything was weird and everything was red. And I called out to my boys. They thought this was noise. They thought it was a dream. They thought it was my toys. They thought it was my problems, and they think I should seek therapy, and I don't know what it is because it doesn't really scare me. If you really want to know who I think I be, I think it's you and me and us and we and him and her and that and she and the